Let's get into Coinbase and the SEC. Also, we'll talk a little bit about Ripple, what this means from a legal front. It's going to be a good one. I think you guys will like it because it's going to, and it could set the case and the course for how crypto is going to be handled here in the United States. So we'll dive into that. But it also has some implications, I think, worldwide. So for all you international listeners and viewers, you're going to like this one. My name is Paul Barron. Welcome back into Tech Path. Before we get started, I want to thank our sponsor today, and that is iTrust Capital. If you're looking at long-term investing and you want to hold it in a crypto IRA, this is one of the best places to do it. You can do it with gold. You can do it with crypto, silver. Roll your current IRA into it, so an existing, or you can start a new one. Lots of options over there. Trade right there within the platform. And of course, if you want to use our link down below, you're going to get a $100 funding reward. So make sure and check that out. It does help the channel out. It's going to be a good one. Joining me today is, of course, MetaLawMan, Mr. James Murphy. Great to have you back on the show.
Thanks, Paul. Always good to be with you.
Yeah, we're going to have some fun. I think the key here is really deciphering what is the strategy for Coinbase. When you look at really the biggest crypto exchange in the United States, could be maybe going head to head with Binance with their current woes if they go into international waters, so to speak. Coinbase already starting to set up, possibly shop in the UAE. This could change the course of crypto in a big way. But if you look at Coinbase, this article right here, Brian Armstrong says, hey, they're on a SEC, being on a lone crusade. I've had a chance to look at some of your own tweets on this as well. This was one you put back, I think it was last week. Nice thread too. I retweeted this for you. If you guys are, and put a little heart there too. If you guys are not following James, by the way, MetaLawMan on Twitter, he does a lot of great jobs on really giving great insights to what's happening. If the SEC follows through with this threat on Coinbase, I believe the SEC will lose. The case has a fatal flaw, and the problem is entirely of Gary Gensler's own making. Now, what do you mean by that, James?
Well, Paul, this is so fascinating for lawyers, spectators. It's a real battle of the titans, and it's a chess match. And the problem is Gary Gensler really made a bad move 2 years ago when he stated publicly, stated is the wrong word, he testified in Congress that the SEC does not have authority to regulate crypto exchanges very clearly. And he said, that's not a good thing. I think Congress should pass a law to give us here at the SEC authority to regulate crypto exchanges because we do not have that now. That was in May of 2021. Coinbase was permitted to go public the prior month in April of 2021. When I say permitted, their offering to the public of shares in Coinbase was approved by the Division of Corporate Finance at the SEC, and they would not have permitted an illegal entity, an illegal business model to go public.
So I'll play contrarian there for a second. Could the SEC and Gensler step back and say, well, listen, facts have changed now. What we didn't know then have changed now, and our new position is where we are today. Could that hold up in a court of law?
They might try that. They've got to explain it away because it's going to be front and center in any litigation. Any litigation, not just Coinbase, any exchange is going to show that. But the facts really have not changed. That's Coinbase's point in its petition for writ of mandamus, as well as in its Wells submission. The facts have not changed. They listed many of the same tokens today as they did at that time. Their business model is pretty much exactly the same. And Congress has not passed any new laws. So the facts have not changed at all. And Gary Gensler, he might say, hey, what did I know? I was just on the job for 1 month. I'd been approved, confirmed in the Senate in April of 2021.
Right.
But he's probably not going to get too far with that for a couple of reasons. Number one, he was the chairman of the CFTC, and they were having the very same conversations about who is going to regulate in the crypto area. And secondly, and I think this is really, really, really critical that people understand this, a chairman of the SEC doesn't just wing it at testimony of Congress. There is tremendous vetting of positions and memos and going through the general counsel's office the chief lawyer at the SEC to approve the positions he's going to take when testifying in Congress. And it wasn't a slip of the tongue, because the following day on CNBC, Gary Gensler reiterated his point that they did not have authority to regulate crypto exchanges, and he thought that was a problem and needed to be solved by Congress.
Yeah, this is, I think it represents a very interesting position, strategic, back to your point, a little bit of a chess match kind of going on between Coinbase and the SEC. When you look at some pundits out there, I'll use Kevin O'Leary as one, he has kind of come in and said, hey, this was a stupid move by Coinbase, never go in and sue your regulator. I know your position as a securities attorney says, wait a minute, the regulator's supposed to do what they're doing. So was Coinbase in the right to take this approach?
Well, I think strategically, in terms of filing for the writ of mandamus, what we have here is a situation where they have been paying attention to what has happened to Ripple. Yeah. And the idea that a public company like Coinbase would have, litigation that calls into question the very existence of the company and its business model hanging over its head for multiple years is not very appealing. And so you would do anything in your power to get an answer from a court quickly. And it looks like they're off to a good start in the Third Circuit with their petition for writ of mandamus.
Okay, all right. With that, you got Coinbase being a publicly traded company. You've had a chance to probably litigate these kind of cases in the past with the SEC. Does that change the perception of how attorneys we'll use Coinbase as the example here, on their side, that would say, all right, we're a publicly traded company, we've got a lot of pressure from our stockholders to do some sort of settlement deal with the SEC? Especially when you're publicly traded, do you feel like there's pressure from the stockholders to get this thing under and done? What are your thoughts?
In many cases, that's true. The example would be the sorts of cases I've handled involving an accounting issue in the past, where the SEC has discovered some sort of accounting issue that happened 4 quarters ago. Of course, it makes sense to just put that behind you and settle with the SEC. Here, it's going to be kind of difficult because the SEC wants to shut down this business model, and it's having great success so far in forcing exchanges out of the United States. And so it really is for the survival of this business model, this battle. So, it will take very creative lawyers to figure out a way to settle this. The way it needs to be settled, quite clearly, is from Congress. And the good news is that, at least on the House side, they have declared that they intend to move quickly and have a bill in 2 months. Where that bill will go in terms of Senate and getting signed by the president is doubtful. But that's where it needs to be settled. And we need to stop, in my opinion, forcing exchanges to leave the country.
Right, sure, for sure. We had this interview with Ron Hammond, who was with the Blockchain Association here just last week. You guys, if you haven't checked that video out, and he said something that supports your statement there, James, and that is his anticipation. They're obviously dealing on the regulatory front from a lobbying standpoint. And his point was that it's likely we could see something very quickly. If we were to see something from a regulatory standpoint fairly quickly, how much implication will that have on what Coinbase is trying to do in the courts? I mean, I'm thinking about this is almost happening in unison. Is one going to sway the other? Like if regulation gets done, Coinbase maybe backs off, or does Coinbase continue on their track currently? And if so, what would be the timeline for that?
There are a lot of tracks here. That's why it's a chess match. So the writ of mandamus is asking the court to order the SEC to make a ruling, to announce its ruling on the request for rulemaking. The rulemaking is basically how are things going to work in this digital asset world. And so if the SEC says, and this is highly unlikely, but if they say, okay, you're right, we need to engage in rulemaking, then there's a good argument that all litigation should be stayed pending the development of those rules. And of course, it would be an acknowledgement that there is a lack of clarity and a necessity of rulemaking for all of the participants in the industry to understand what's going on here. More likely, they're going to refuse, and then Coinbase will sue them again for violating the Administrative Procedures Act, because they have to give a reason for refusing to issue these rules. And the Coinbase's position is there's a lack of clarity. Your refusal to issue rules is unreasonable under the Administrative Procedures Act, and so we're off to more litigation.
Okay, so as far as timing, would this, again, this goes back to, let's pull regulation off the table for a moment. Let's say that it takes a little longer. But in the courts, is this another Ripple case where we see multi-year lawsuits and just racking up of legal bills happening here?
Unfortunately, that's very possible, because while we will get a ruling quickly on the petition for a writ of mandamus from the Third Circuit, if I'm correct and the SEC refuses to engage in rulemaking, then we're off to another initiation of litigation that will go on for a while, probably not as long as Ripple, because Coinbase would be moving for an injunction that really would not require a trial per se to force the SEC to move. Meanwhile, the SEC's case against Coinbase, where they've issued a Wells notice, can go on for a very long time and could lead to a trial. And the trial would be about, are they or are they not listing securities? Are these tokens securities?
Last up here, Coinbase's Stand with Crypto program launched. We did a big piece on this, but at the time we did the video, I think it was around 15,000 minted NFTs. This is kind of an interesting thing. I feel like this backfired on Coinbase slightly, in the sense that there's only 103,000 minted NFTs. And the reason I say that is I feel like this should have been some sort of just support campaign that just allowed anybody to do it without going in and minting, just to show the strength behind this. I look at this and I think, interesting that we haven't seen a lot of movement in that space. With that being the case, in terms of investors just simply saying, I don't think this is good for me, I don't think this is good for Coinbase, what is the recoil? And I think of it in the way of you sitting in a room with your client. They're a publicly traded company, and they're sitting there going, hey, listen, we have a lot of pressure from our investors. We're not getting support over here. Regulation is slow to come, and the SEC is fighting hard. What would you say to a client? Would you say, hey, let's back off, or let's settle, deal with this in a different way? What would be kind of the strategy here?
Well, it is Coinbase's position that they have done everything they can possibly do to try to talk about settlement and a path forward to actual registration of the platform, and they're just not getting an honest broker on the other side to negotiate with. And so what they're doing makes sense, and that is looking all over the world for other places where a Coinbase platform could be successful in getting licenses, from other places, Bermuda and Middle East, and figuring that all out. They've got a fiduciary duty to explore all alternatives from a business perspective. And if there was a way to settle with the SEC, I'm sure they would prefer it just as much as their shareholders would.
I want to jump over to the scenario as this plays out, because we have a good case study under the microscope right now in Ripple. Ripple CEO puts basically legal costs at around $200 million. That's a significant number. And then you also have the Ripple and Coinbase's legal minds. This is Paul Graywall and Alderati coming together in a meeting. Is this normal? I mean, I don't remember attorneys going into these kind of alignments. Is this something that you've seen in the industry before?
Yes. So Coinbase and Ripple are not competitors. So what would be a little unusual is if Coinbase got together with all of the other exchanges
Like Binance or something,
that
sure.
used to exist here in the United States,
Okay.
and coordinated something, that would raise a few eyebrows. But there is some resentment, obviously, from the Ripple XRP community for Coinbase delisting XRP back at the end of 2020, within 6 days of the SEC suit against Ripple. They made that announcement. And now, they're not delisting when the SEC sued Bittrex and called out 6 specific tokens that they claimed were securities. And 2 of those were listed on Coinbase at the time, a month ago or whenever it was, and they're still listed, still traded, and no indication that they're planning on delisting. So I think they're sticking to their guns now, and there may be a little bit of mending fences there with the Ripple legal team and Coinbase.
Interesting. Yeah. If you look at Ripple's position right now, and you see potentially maybe coming to the end of their particular case, do you feel like Ripple would be in a position fatigued enough to say, hey, let's settle something? There's been indications, there's been some meetings here recently with the SEC. Or do they go ahead and execute this all the way through and carry it across the line?
Yeah, I don't have any inside information there, but the speculation is that there could be a settlement where some concession is made to the SEC with respect to the initial issuance of the XRP token, but that secondary trading is definitely not a security. That's an idea that's been floated out there. The SEC would have a difficult time agreeing to that, because that would really undermine any case against Coinbase. And if they're going to continue this case against Bittrex, which is kind of up in the air now that Bittrex has declared bankruptcy yesterday.
Yeah. My question to you, James, is this. When you look at the current landscape of the legal field, you and I have talked about this off camera before, and you look at, this is a very highly specialty area because of the fact there's no regulation, there's really no case law, and all of that being, kind of really pinged into this. Is this going to really narrow down to just a handful of law firms dealing with all of these kinds of cases as we get into regulatory guidance and those kind of things? Or do you think we'll see a kind of a gold rush in the legal sector of getting specialty expertise in these areas?
That's a great question, Paul. And back when I was running a law firm, we asked ourselves that exact question, and we really focused on the crypto space back in 2017 and developed a lot of expertise and hired lawyers from the SEC and the CFTC. I'm retired now from that role, but right now, if you want to fight the SEC in litigation, you need a large law firm. There's no question about that. And what you want are lawyers who worked at the SEC, and in particular, lawyers who worked in the Division of Enforcement at a high level at the SEC, and they know how things work. I think Ripple's got a really, really strong group.
Yeah, a lot of ex-SEC guys on there. Yeah.
Yes, the head of the SEC, head of the Division of Enforcement as well. And then John Deaton is a real big plus there. And so that model is a good model to create problems, for the SEC. Mm-hmm. And to have, someone speak up for these token holders so that they're not just stuck, in limbo on the sidelines, but rather can have a voice in this litigation and explain to the judge, as John Deaton has done so well, that I represent thousands and thousands of these token holders. They don't want the quote unquote protection of the SEC. They want the SEC to stop. That is something new. We haven't seen that in my career, really. Prior to John doing that, that's very rare. And I think it's important. And I think that people are going to consider that part of the playbook now, going forward. You take the Bittrex case, for instance. Algorand was called out as one of the 6 tokens that's a security in the eyes of the SEC. And the CEO of Algorand came right out of the box saying that's ridiculous. This is not any security, and this, we take issue with that. Whether they would enter the case or whether holders of Algorand would enter the case to challenge that contention is a great question. But now with the bankruptcy, my guess is that whole thing will settle.
Yeah.
And Bittrex, I think, did the right thing. Sorry to go in a little bit different direction here, but when they filed bankruptcy, they filed a plan at the same time and said, under our plan, we're going to return all of the cash and crypto to all of our customers first. And then, the SEC and OFAC and FinCEN can pick over what's left and fine, whatever, do whatever they want with what's left of the estate of Bittrex US.
All right, so let's take it from one other angle here, and that is when you get into things like Fortune 500 companies. Let's go to Fortune 100. Here's Microsoft joining in with Goldman Sachs and others on a new blockchain network. So it's very clear that major tech and finance is starting to move to this space. Also, Fidelity has already moved in significantly. Their research level has started to ramp up. So we're seeing a lot of familiar faces in this. And if you look at just how these blockchain networks, just to give you an example, this is the financial market participants in this launch of the industry's first global blockchain network for institutional assets. And this has things like Deloitte in here, DRW, CBOE, Deutsche, you've got in here, FinClear, Paxos, obviously, Moody's. I mean, these are all recognized as pretty major holders in the terms of traditional business. How do they start to position themselves to deal with this kind of thing, whether it's with the SEC or the regulatory environment, from their own coffers of legal analysts and internal counsel? How do they go about that?
Well, when you put that graphic up, it just really reinforces what a lot of people believe was the whole impetus for Gary Gensler's regulation by enforcement crusade. And Hester Peirce said, we don't have a good faith regulator here now. We have somebody who's simply trying to protect incumbents. That's her statement, not mine, just quoting her. But boy, it kind of looks that way, doesn't it? And it's got to hurt for those who really believe in that ethos of decentralization.
Yeah.
To see these mammoth companies coming in and taking over. And I mean, it's good that this technology is being embraced. And these players have a lot of political clout that the crypto industry does not have. And so they may chart the path forward. And I simply hope that there's still some space for a decentralized answer to a lot of these questions as well.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head there, is that you look at just the lobbying power alone, from just that grid that I showed you. And this is just going to be one of many kinds of blockchains that get developed. And this goes back to even my own history in blockchain in the 2017s. The first time I looked at blockchain, I'm a business guy, a media guy, and I often look at how blockchain technologies was being deployed. And what I found back in that era was it was a lot of blue sky, and I've seen this in the tech space, a lot of fluff, not a lot of substance. IBM was in it, Microsoft. This time around, it's a different game. We're actually starting to see use case, utility playing into this. Obviously, NFTs have changed the landscape quite a bit. And now just the awareness factor. But it almost feels as though this market has been primed and primed and primed, and we're right on the edge of maybe litigate or regulation and possibly an explosion of banks, major industry. Obviously, the legal field and the lobbying field, I think, starts to play into this, especially if you look on the global perspective of all this. So I would agree with you. Interesting times for sure. Binance also has recently said, hey, we're going to do an NFT marketplace. We're going to add support for Bitcoin NFTs. This whole thing with Oridinals that's happening within it right now. You look at it, I know you kind of look at the space in general. What is your take on what's happening within the ordinal space right now especially around Bitcoin? What are your thoughts on that?
I really don't know the space in detail. All I know is what I read is that it seems to be driving up the costs and slowing down confirmation of blocks and this stuff. I know people, are very interested in it and investing in it and enthusiastic about these ordinals. I don't know enough, and I'm not planning on investing in that area myself. But my concern is, does it have a negative impact on the usefulness of the Bitcoin blockchain for typical uses of peer-to-peer payment network? That it was intended to be. That's my only concern, really.
Yeah, many people would argue that it does. Obviously, with transaction fees skyrocketing, causing the halting of Bitcoin trading on Binance, and then also just this whole idea of block consolidation. And what it might mean in terms of where the opportunities might lie in the Lightning Network becoming a big play into this. So again, this is all could mean there could be some regulatory elements that play into this. But like any tech, and this is often what I get into is with different people, is that any technology is always going to get challenged. Any technology is always going to have those last minute little chinks in its armor that have to get cleaned up before it becomes something really special. It's happened in the internet era, social era, mobile era. Everybody's kind of in the same scenario. When you think about the technology shift that we're dealing with right now, moving forward, let's look at Apple. Apple just recently lost a case in California, 30% NFT tax, which essentially is just the Apple ecosystem, the store. Any app you roll out on there, if you did any in-app purchases, you're getting, ding that 30% Apple tax. That apparently now is illegal according to California state law. Likelihood is this going to happen. We're going to see more pressure from the Europeans pushing on this. Europe is even going into the scenario right here on Apple's whole approach toward not only the ecosystem, but even their hardware is getting attacked. How long before we see companies like Apple kind of succumb to this and say, well, technology is changing, we need to shift our business models?
Yeah, great question. It's really a fascinating situation, Paul, because what you have here are companies that their product or their service is so good and in such great demand that they gain market power and they can dictate the rules of how things work. And that is okay to a point. And then it's not okay anymore. And so courts have to kind of draw that line, and a 30% toll, taking a toll of 30% on transactions through apps is a lot. I mean, that's really a lot, and impacts if you think about a normal profit margin, you subtract 30, you put a lot of businesses out of business. The business model doesn't work anymore. And moreover, they prohibit in-app other payment systems of your own app. And that was the Epic Games wanted to have their own payment system. And that is an essential part of what we're not talking about too much anymore that was red hot last year, and that's the metaverse, and selling NFTs in the metaverse. I think it was Citibank was projecting like 30 trillion or something by the 2030s. It's just an enormous economy in the metaverse. And you can't have a private entity taking a toll of 30%, because you and I know that real government taxing authorities are going to come in a big way. And that's where there's going to be real battles about state, local, and international taxation of these transactions.
Yeah, I think the argument for, with Apple's side of it is that, hey, listen, it's our audience, it's our devices. We should get a cut of this, maybe not 30%, maybe it's more like a 10%, tax, so to speak. Much like many of these platforms, I mean, YouTube, as a creator, you're paying a tremendous amount in a YouTube tax. If you're a Substack operator, you're paying a 10% tax right now with Substack. Almost every platform out there, I anticipate we're going to see some stuff coming from Twitter that might be similar to this. So it feels like there's some gated elements starting to build into these, these technology frontiers. Blockchain is a little different, so it represents, uniqueness. I feel like there's going to be a lot of legal battles coming in the next few years around all this technology as people continue to look at whether it's suppression or just use case scenarios. So it's going to be interesting to watch for sure. Always fun to have you on the show. I want to jump over to our poll today and take a look at that, because one of the things that we try to do here on the show, as you know, is kind of get feedback from the audience on how they think these things are going to play out. So which lawsuit is more promising right now to win? Looks like Coinbase is actually up there on the top on Coinbase versus the SEC, coming in at 45%. Ripple coming in at number 2, obviously. I would agree with that. Do you like the Ripple's, likelihood? If you were selecting on this poll, what would you choose?
Well, it depends exactly what you mean. If the Ripple case gets to the Supreme Court of the United States, I believe it is highly likely that Ripple wins and the SEC loses. It's dicey to predict what one particular federal judge will or will not do with massive contrasting motions for summary judgment. But as Ripple, I hate to say it, this is going to take more time, as Ripple goes to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals and then to the United States Supreme Court, I like their chances a lot.
What would you say is the number one thing they bring in terms of their defense to the Supreme Court that you feel, hey, this is a good probability they could win this?
It's the big question. It's the ultimate question. And that is, the SEC lacks authority from Congress to regulate in this space. It is the major questions doctrine. There are 6 votes at the Supreme Court right now for this major questions doctrine, which says if you are going to claim the authority to regulate a massive industry and a new asset class, you have got to get that authority from Congress. And it's exactly what Gary Gensler said in May of 2021. He was right then. He's wrong now. But there are 6 votes for that. And I think this is a perfect case of a major question that can only be settled by Congress.
Hey, James, last question for you, because this is kind of a unique territory. I think maybe not you, with your securities background, maybe you've seen this before, but you have a regulation track happening here. You've got Coinbase and Ripple happening over here, maybe advancing up to Supreme Court, additional litigation. What happens if we actually get to regulation before a Supreme Court hearing or adjustment? How does that affect lawsuits and legal actions that are in the vein of what's happening at that point? Does everything just go off the board, or what happens?
That's pretty rare. This is a rare scenario, and why it's, I guess, a multi-dimensional chess game here. But the courts would have to decide, okay, the SEC now has a set of regulations at long last. So are they enforceable or are they not? So we're back to the courts somebody would assert those are unenforceable because they never had the authority to regulate in this space to begin with. Right. Okay.
So then it's all timeline, and it's like, all right, now we know the rules are here going forward. Here's the rule set. Prior to that, now I would think that would play to both Coinbase's and Ripple's position, for timing wise. But again,
well, I'll tell you, Paul, who this all favors. The fact that it's going to be very, very difficult to get any legislation through and signed prior to 2025. This favors the European Union, the UK, the Middle East, Bermuda, Singapore, Hong Kong, Australia, you name it. Those are the ones who are benefiting from our inability to act in a prompt, reasonable fashion to get a set of rules like they've been able to do in all these other countries.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head there. It's one of the biggest things we talk about here on this channel is that innovation stifling it of what's happening in the U.S. and the potential of what could happen in blockchain is pretty pretty critical out there for sure. James, always fun having you in on the channel today. Thank you for spending some time with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Paul. Enjoyed it.
You bet. All right, so you guys, James and I were just hitting on this, innovation and the stifling of that. This is one of the things that you, as a viewer or listener, if you're on the podcast, can do right now. You can go out and talk to your own lawmakers, your own people that represent your particular area of the country here in the United States, and let them know your position. Let them know your position not only on crypto, but understanding what technology innovation means to the United States. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of people don't really understand, that you can do that today. Your lawmakers are there to take your calls, letters, emails. I think it will help. So make sure, spread the news. Let's share this video. Make sure and smash a like right here before you leave. If you're not in our Diamond Circle, make sure and get in. That's our free email newsletter. It also does a lot of additional content drops. And of course, if you want to catch me, it's out there on Twitter, @Paul Barron. We'll catch you next time right here on TechPath.